Russian propaganda is distributing new fakes about Ukraine. This time, Kremlin-aligned media is trying to accuse Ukraine in preparing a provocation in unrecognized Transnistria and producing the chemical weapons. See details in Fake Check.
Zelensky calls on the USA to send its citizens to fight for Ukraine. Some social media users spread messages that the president of Ukraine is allegedly invoking NATO to enter the war if they want to avoid providing enough weapons, and the United States to send its sons and daughters to participate in military operations. An 18-second video excerpt from the press conference of Ukraine's president on the anniversary of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th is added as proof.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war, and they will have to fight because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
This excerpt of the interview is taken out of context and misleads the audience. The shared video is part of Zelensky's response to a BBC journalist's question about what he would like to say to the growing number of American citizens who believe that the United States gives too much support to Ukraine.
If it happens so that Ukraine, due to various opinions and weakening and depleting of assistance, loses, Russia is going to enter Baltic states, NATO member states, and then the U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war, and they will have to fight because it's NATO that we're talking about.
The full answer shows that Volodymyr Zelensky did not call on NATO to enter the war on the side of Ukraine, and even more so, did not state that the U.S. should send its military to fight against Russia. Secretary of Ukraine's National Security Council says that Ukraine is ready to stop destabilization in Moldova by military means. Russian media spread this information and wrote that Ukraine does not rule out the invasion of Ukrainian troops into Transnistria.
Kyiv can intervene in a situation around the unrecognized Transnistrian Moldovan Republic if the Moldovan authorities ask for it, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Alexei Danilov, said in an interview with RBC Ukraine on March 3rd.
The Secretary of the National Security Council did not make such statements. Asked whether Ukraine is ready to help Moldova in the event of a corresponding request from the country's president, Maya Sandu, Alexei Danilov answered.
If there is such an appeal, it can be considering all the processes and circumstances that occur, especially since we're neighbors.
This quote became the reason for manipulation. However, Alexei Danilov did not make any statements that Ukraine is ready to provide military support to Moldova and is preparing an invasion of Transnistria. Ukraine is making a dirty bomb using californium-252. The Russian media actively spread the disinformation statement of the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, who once again tried to accuse Ukraine of creating nuclear weapons.
According to this data, on February 16th, containers with radioactive substances and English marking were delivered to the port of Chernomorsk, bypassing customs inspection from the territory of one of the European states.
Zakharova again stated that the Kyiv regime is preparing an armed provocation against Transnistria, adding that Ukraine is allegedly planning an attack on Transnistria with the use of radioactive substances.
In addition, this time the Russian disinformation is observed from a scientific perspective. Californium-252, which Zakharova claims is scarce and costly radioactive metal. Californium-252 does not occur naturally and is produced exclusively under laboratory conditions in a high-flow isotope reactor.
This is not the first time the Russian authorities have tried to accuse Ukraine of preparing mythical nuclear provocations. None of the Kremlin's claims have ever been confirmed. This time was no exception. In response to Russian disinformation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Moldova stated that it does not comment on fakes.
And now we're here to ruin the fakes produced by the Russian propaganda machine alongside my next guest, whose name is Yevhen Fedchenko, and he is the chief editor of StopFake. So, hello and welcome.
Hello.
So, why does the Russian propaganda machine keep spreading the fakes about Zelensky's alleged threats of participation of foreign armies in the war in Ukraine? Why do they do that?
Actually, this is a narrative which Russia is using quite a long time already to allegedly prove that in Ukraine, it's not Ukraine actually fighting against Russia, but the collective West or NATO or United States. And they want to find different fake stories to enhance this fake narrative. And what you just said is just one of those examples. And they want to use this narrative actually to frighten the Western audiences and to make sure that they are frightened by just this sheer possibility of some American soldiers or European soldiers participating in this war. So they expect that that would make an effect that our Western allies and partners would put more pressure on Ukraine to start negotiations with Russia and to stop fighting in this war. And so this is very kind of emotional appeal, which main point here is to frighten Western audiences. And Russian propaganda is not alone of pushing this narrative. If we would go to social media accounts, we would find a lot of influencers in different parts of the world who are also pushing this very narrative that actually Russia is fighting not against Ukraine, but is fighting against collective West.
And that is the narrative by Russian propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. This is a narrative by Russian propaganda, and they are pushing it for a very long period of time, actually since 2014, as soon as they occupied Crimea and Donbass, they started to use this very narrative to implicate the West participating in this conflict.
Okay, I see. And now let's talk a bit about the Transnistria. So, all those fakes produced by the Kremlin-aligned media, so does it mean that Russia is preparing for the next step, the new provocations in the unrecognized Transnistria?
Yeah, as we know from our previous experience, every time Russia is mentioning anti-Russian provocations, and blaming Ukraine for that, that means actually they are preparing those provocations and they just want to use those kind of false flag approach to make sure that they accuse Ukraine in what they are going to do by themselves. So if we would look back at the history of Russia blaming Ukraine in trying to produce any kind of conflict in Transnistria, this story is also not new. So they are mulling it for at least 1 year and promising that from day to day they expect Ukraine to do something big over there. And of course, the main point here is to accuse Ukraine in producing the regional instability that actually is not Russia, but Ukraine allegedly is the source of this regional instability. And also they want to produce more panic in Moldova. Also they want to put more pressure on government in Moldova because of this. And also they want to confuse international audiences in terms of blaming Ukraine in this war, and that Ukraine allegedly wants to escalate even further to make this conflict not the war between Russia and Ukraine, but to internationalize it and to get more countries and regions involved in this war. So this narrative, as I said, is not new. But so far they failed to produce any kind of facts supporting these accusations on the ground. And so this time, even the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs started to kind of muse this at the very kind of high levels that they again expect Ukraine to do something. But actually, as you've seen from the story, which was debunked by StopFake, Ukrainian government and Ukrainian officials were never saying anything close to what Russia is Ukraine blaming on, that Ukraine is allegedly trying to use military force to solve Transnistria problem. Ukraine is just saying that we would respond to the things on the ground according to the situation and according to the actions and requests coming from authorities in Moldova.
So, but what does it mean for the locals and the international community? Do they have to expect like new crises and new steps or maybe new provocations?
It might be the signs because, again, as we know from previous experience, every time Russia is building some strategic narratives about some issues, that means that they might be kind of support, in fact, for further military actions. So we cannot dismiss it and just ignore, because, I mean, if they try to increase the level of information campaign, information war efforts, that means that probably they want to support some, kinetic efforts on the ground by this. So definitely we really need to pay more attention to this. And also the kind of international community need to pay more attention to this region and to make sure that Russia would receive enough signals not to do that, not to kind of internationalize this war even further to the region.
Thank you. And now let's talk a bit about the third case. So we've seen some fakes about the combat mosquitoes, about the fighting geese, and now they are talking about the chemical elements and chemical weapons. So why, despite all the absurdity, the Russian propaganda machine keeps producing those amount of disinformation? Why do they do that?
Yeah, that's not the only story when they use either biological, chemical, or atomic weapons threat allegedly coming from Ukraine, because this is one of the elements, again, to frighten international audience and to portray Ukraine not as a victim of this war, but actually as a perpetrator of the war, which is using different elements of the weapons of mass destruction. And so in this case, actually, Russia is mirroring its own efforts and try to blame Ukraine what actually they are using, because it's Russia which is using elements of nuclear blackmail. Let's look at what they've been doing at Chernobyl nuclear power station, or what they are currently doing at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So that's Russia actually which is using atomic weapon or atomic facilities to put more pressure on the international community. But in this story, they want to put the responsibility on Ukraine and demonstrate that Ukraine allegedly is violating international agreements and is trying to use different, elements to use as, in this case, as elements of atomic weapons. And if we would go back to pre-invasion days, we would remember that that was one of these big master narratives Russia was using as a prerequisite to start full-scale aggression against Ukraine, that Ukraine allegedly is developing atomic weapons. So now, again, they can kind of go in full circle, and we again are at the same point where we've been back in February 2022.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's always a pleasure. Yevgen Fedchenko, the chief editor of StopFake, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.